So there's been some emails coming in and questions being asked. And so I thought just to share some reflections about something in the Dharma that I've thought about for quite a number of years. So this isn't a fully formed conclusion, it's some thoughts, okay? So one of the things that provoked me to think about this was somebody wrote a question and they were asking about holy beings harming others. For example, in the story that we all hear about the Buddha in a previous life, he was the captain of a ship, and with 500 merchants who had gathered all these jewels and were taking them back. And one person on the ship thought to kill the 500 and then abscond with all the jewels. And the Buddha, who was a bodhisattva at that time, as the captain of the ship, then killed the would-be murderer and saved the lives of the 500. Okay, so somebody's saying, does that mean that holy beings can harm others? That this is okay, and that we simple ones cannot understand the long-term view. But of course, a holy being wouldn't harm others. So how are we supposed to understand this? Okay, so I went back and found the story. It's in one of the sutras called the Sutra of Skillful Means. Okay, so he was the captain of the ship, and before deciding on killing this would-be murderer, he tried to think of other ways to prevent the man from killing the 500 merchants. But when they were about to land back on land, which was when he would kill them and take the jewels, he couldn't think of any other way. He couldn't find any other way to stop the guy from committing murder. So it was only when he couldn't find another way that out of compassion, in order to protect the murderer, in other words, not just to protect the 500 who would be killed, but especially with compassion to protect the murderer, the would-be murderer, then he decided to kill that man, okay? So it was with compassion for everybody in the whole situation. Also, what is interesting is that the 500 merchants were all bodhisattvas who had reached the level of non-regression. So the 500 were not ordinary beings, okay? And to reach the level of non-regression, people can reach it at different stages, but definitely by the 8th bhumi, okay? So these were highly realized bodhisattvas who had already eliminated the afflictive obscurations. So, they wouldn't have gone to the lower realms or experienced pain had they been murdered, but the person who would murder them would experience. So that's why the captain's primary compassion was for the would-be murderer, okay? So by doing this, the sutra says that he avoided, the bodhisattva, who was the Buddha, avoided many eons of suffering in samsara by doing this. But when he did it, he was completely willing to take on the karmic result of killing somebody. Okay, so it wasn't like he was saying, well, these 500 guys are my friends, and this guy's going to kill them. And so, with partiality to protect my friends, I'm just going to, use this story and pretend I was a bodhisattva and stick up for my friends. Okay? But so it wasn't like that at all. And it was really done out of compassion. And because of that compassion, his time in samsara was shortened. And like I just mentioned, he was completely willing to accept the karma retribution of being born in the hell realms. I spoke with Geshe Dadul when he was here last year about this story, because for years this story has always puzzled me. It's always been something I've had difficulties with. And Geshe-la said, and this makes a lot of sense to me, it was a very good answer. He said, if a bodhisattva does an action that looks like, that otherwise, if done by a normal person, would be a negative action. And if this is an Arya bodhisattva, who's already realized emptiness, and so on, then that bodhisattva would be completely willing to go to the hell realms or to accept whatever worldly punishment might come as a result of doing this action. Okay? So in this case, with this captain, he was completely willing to accept the suffering of going to the hell realms for however many eons it would take in order to save the life of these 500 merchants. Okay, and he would also be willing to accept whatever worldly consequences would occur. So in the sutra just speaks about him shortening his time in samsara as a result of this. But I was thinking, if such a thing happened in our day and age, upon landing on ground, he would be arrested. Yeah, there's also the law of the land to consider. So Geshe-la was saying that somebody who would do this with such intense compassion would be completely willing to accept being tried in a public court, having his reputation ruined, and going to prison for murder. Yeah, that's how strong his compassion would be when doing this kind of action. So that really made much more sense to me in this whole thing. Okay? Also, as a result, because it was a bodhisattva who killed this would-be murderer, that guy was born in one of the celestial realms. How he could be reborn in a celestial realm although he had the motivation to kill 500 people, is beyond me. But anyway, it worked to benefit him in the long run. Okay, and the sutra says, don't think that the bodhisattva could receive the karmic retribution and still avoid eons in samsara. Okay, so people have different views. I've heard different views about this. And some people say that that bodhisattva was indeed born in the hell realm for a short time, but because of his compassion, his time in samsara was shortened and he was very quickly freed from that hellish rebirth. Other people say he was never reborn in the hell realm to start with. Okay, but the point is that when he did the action, he was completely willing for that to happen. Okay, so this, these other things that are said when you read the story really help my mind understand it, because very often this story is put out there and people interpret it to mean, oh, well, if I have a compassionate motivation, I can do anything. But our level of compassion is not the level of compassion of this bodhisattva who did it. Yeah? Our level of compassion is compassion for our friends, and aversion for the enemy, or at most some kind of fabricated compassion. So to do this kind of behavior, you actually have to have very intense compassion and, be very high on the bodhisattva path. So this is not something that is recommended for ordinary beings. And like I said, a bodhisattva would be willing to accept even the worldly results of doing such an action. Okay? Now, and I say this because what has always been my sticky point with this story is that you hear, well, we don't know who's a bodhisattva and who isn't a bodhisattva, so we shouldn't get angry at anybody, okay? And we shouldn't criticize anybody because that person may be a bodhisattva and it's incredible negative karma to criticize a bodhisattva or interfere with the virtuous activities of a bodhisattva. So this has always puzzled me because does that mean, that you see two people fighting in the street, clobbering each other or pulling out guns, and, you come across it as an ordinary being and you think, well, this one is Kalarupa and this one is Mahakala. So this is all a display of holy beings, and I shouldn't interfere because then I would be creating the negative karma of interfering with bodhisattva's virtuous actions, and I shouldn't report this to the police or criticize these two beings who look like ordinary beings but could be Kalarupa and Mahakala, because if I criticize them, then I'm criticizing bodhisattvas. So people, they never address that kind of question. I can't remember which of my teachers I asked, but the answer to that was, yeah, you can, they may be bodhisattvas, but you still have to deal with it on an ordinary conventional level. So you can deal with it without being angry, because this whole teaching on seeing everybody as a bodhisattva is a technique to avoid getting angry. Okay, it's not that everybody actually is a bodhisattva and we're the only ordinary being left, and so therefore we shouldn't criticize anybody. It's a technique so that we don't get angry, okay? But he said you still have to deal with it on an ordinary conventional level, because if you don't, then you're really falling to quite an ethically nihilistic position, And Tsongkhapa, in his teachings on emptiness, emphasized again and again and again that the realization of emptiness does not destroy conventionalities. Yeah, and that when you have a realization of emptiness, it makes your appreciation for the law of cause and effect more intense, and it makes you follow karma, the law of cause and effect, even more subtly, with greater conscientiousness, that's what the realization of emptiness does. So the realization of emptiness is not an excuse, as you hear sometimes, oh, there's no good, there's no bad, you can do anything. Yeah. And even in the Tantras, it says that for Tantra practitioners to do this very unconventional behavior, they have to have the ability to make an apple drop off from the apple tree and then make it go back up and continue growing on the apple tree. Okay, so this isn't any kind of ordinary person who can, do this unconventional behavior. So I think that that's important to remember and keep in mind. And we all need to practice at our own level. And there may be holy beings who can do these wonderful kinds of things. But I don't know about you. I have to keep my feet on the ground and practice the Vinaya and, be very careful about my actions because I don't have these kinds of realizations. Okay? So, I can't tell for anybody else, but I need to work on myself, and we need to follow, worldly conventions in dealing with this situation. Yeah? And His Holiness talked about that when we had this Western Buddhist Teachers Conference with him in 1993. So I heard this with my own ears. And His Holiness was saying, because many people were bringing to His Holiness stories of unbecoming behavior on the part of some Dharma teachers. And His Holiness spoke from his own experience because his two principal teachers, Reting Rinpoche and Tatra Rinpoche, it's unclear whether they were engaged in a feud or whether their attendants were engaged in a feud. But in any case, Sera Monastery was involved, and there was a war, basically, between the central government and the monastery. So, so then these are both His Holiness's teachers, who he's received tantric empowerment from, and they are both regents while he is still in a minority. What do you do? So he said in his meditation, he saw both of his regents as Buddhas because they were so kind in giving him the initiation, teaching him the Dharma, guiding him in the Dharma. Yeah? And so in that respect, they were doing the work of the Buddha in relationship to him. But he said, when he arose from his meditation and he had to deal with the affairs of state, he told his tutors, what you're doing is wrong. You need to stop. And when he told this, the rest of us Westerners sat there with our mouths open because, in astonishment, because what we do is if somebody does something good, we make that person 100% good. If they do something bad, we make them 100% bad. We don't have, we have to develop the ability to separate the person from the actions and evaluate the role that the person plays to us in different contexts and different situations. Yeah? And the fact that His Holiness could do this, and he didn't feel any contradiction in his own mind doing this, was, I think, what astonished those of us who heard him say that. So it really, for me, was a lesson in thinking more deeply about these kinds of things and, separating the person and the action and separating what holy beings do from ordinary appearances, but still being able to maintain the law of karma and effect. So these are just some thoughts that I've had over the years in dealing with this. Like I said, it's not a conclusion, but I thought to share them with you because many people have been asking this kind of question recently.
I'm just wondering if in the sutra or another reliable source, they address that the Buddha in his previous life as a bodhisattva knew what was going to happen to the person that he killed after that person died. Like we've talked about before, about maybe you need to know that they're going to have a better rebirth or something like that. Was that addressed in there?
Yeah, the part, I just read that small part in the sutra. I can send you the whole sutra so you can read the whole thing. The small, because it was giving a bunch of different examples. So it didn't say that in that particular example, but it may have. Yeah. But yeah, because that was one thing that Lama Yeshe used to mention to us when we asked about euthanizing animals, and he would say, if you know what their rebirth is going to be, yeah, but if you don't know, be careful. So